Okay, thanks for joining me. My name is Eric. It's now September 27th, 2020, and the name of my YouTube channel is Eric's Eye Opener. And the title of this video, and it is a tribute to Stephen F. Cohen, who died on the 18th of September, and that's going to be Stephen F. Cohen, an eye-opening tribute. And so, yeah, let's get started here. I really want to focus primarily before I start to deliver some of my deprogramming platform material, which is very important in all my videos. But I want to talk about really the premise of what Stephen F. Cohen was trying to do with regards to helping humankind. And that's really important. And I think it's a topic that really probably won't be presented enough. And that's why I'm going to focus on it. That is detente with Russia, right? Cohen was very, very concerned because there was really such hatred for Trump. Now, I'm not a Democrat and I'm not a Republican. I don't believe in that. I actually believe it's one party. We'll get into that in another video. But very important to understand that whatever you think, and Cohen's very clear that he didn't vote for Trump, right? But the problem is he is president, and he was president really pretty much the whole time that this nonsense of Russiagate was going on. Now, did Russia interfere in our elections? Probably, to some extent. Nobody would deny that, but nobody's interfered in elections, comparatively speaking, the way the United States has, right? Michael Hayden was former head of the NSA and the CIA, and he said that the United States is the best in the world at manipulating other countries' elections. So who are we? What kind of hypocrisy is this? And from what we know, the only evidence we have is some Facebook ads, right, that criticized Hillary Clinton. But that's not the point. The point is, are you willing to destroy a planet, your family, all the people you love, life on this planet, because you don't like Trump, right? And that's what was going on here. Nothing could be more important than detente with Russia, all right? If people don't understand that, they're just not seeing clearly. And that's very difficult. People get caught up in this emotional fog of politics. Remember, when they target you with propaganda, they target your emotional side, not your intellectual side. So people aren't thinking clearly, and we all tend to get emotional over things that are important to us, right? So let's keep this in mind. And that is what Cohen really was trying to tell people. Are you willing to give up life on this planet because you hate Trump so much? And look, I don't like Trump. And I'm going to make this clear too. Each subsequent president, in my view, is the worst president in U.S. history. All right. Corruption doesn't contract. It doesn't go away. It expands, right? We have all these historians that have their opinions on who was the worst president. And I'll get into this. I mean, it's very easy to understand. And these bankers, the people who control the money supply, control the world. All right. So let's talk about a couple of people before I really get into more of Cohen and more history of Russia, which is what we're going to do. We'll present that in this video. But I want to talk about somebody like first of all, Lenin in Russia in 1917 during the revolution. Lenin was famous for saying that if you want to find out who's guilty, look for who stands to gain, right? Ayn Rand said, you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of reality. That's a great expression, all right? But these people weren't the first to express these concepts. They receive the benefit of it, the contract. Basically, people represent them as the originator of these expressions, these quotes, these adages. So Lucius Cassius was the first to say, and basically what Lenin said. Lucius Cassius was a consul in ancient Rome. He lived from 151 BC to 107 BC, so he lived to be about 44, right? And as a consul in ancient Rome, he was a judge, and he determined the outcome of his cases based on who he thought stood to profit. That's how we have to determine the context in history, because we are not told the truth about history. There are certain people out there who have actually revealed, that a lot of these books are actually just endorsed by historians, and they're paid to endorse them as if they wrote them, right? But most of this material is written by the establishment, the centralized power. People talk about the same adages being in more than one book, right? And different books on different topics. So we have to understand by looking at the events and the people, the figures that we know from history. And we have to understand, we have to look for behaviors that repeat patterns, right? It's very easy to understand and look for who stands to profit, right? So that's Lucius Cassius. That was Lenin. Juvenal was a writer in ancient Rome. A couple of centuries later, toward the end of the first century AD, Juvenal was really a satirical poet, and he took notice that the ruling class of Rome were really diverting the attention of the citizenry off the political forum, the really important issues into the games in the arena, the Colosseum, the chariot races, much like we do today. We saw it with the Clinton impeachment trial, where they focused, it was Ken Starr that focused on this, oral sex in the Oval Office with a young intern, Monica Lewinsky, and that made a lot of people very angry. Once again, targeting the emotional side of our mind, right? Not the intellectual side. It just makes people angry on an ethical basis. They attack, and so same thing is true with Trump. Really, this whole RussiaGate thing, as Noam Chomsky said, the Democratic Party has been a laughingstock all over the world for believing such nonsense. Again, doesn't mean it didn't happen to some degree, but what kind of hypocrisy is that? If you can't understand that your country interferes more in Russia's election or in every other country's election that's important to them than Russia could ever do, right? So that's really important. So that again, they targeted the emotional side. This was all about things that they made up about Ukraine. Okay, actually, Trump was right in not sending arms to Ukraine, and we'll get into this. And again, let's make it very clear. I'm right down the middle. I'm actually more left, but I consider the Democratic Party quite right, as Noam Chomsky says, and not right as incorrect. They are quite right-winged. They believe in war more than they ever have, and they push these war agendas that are really propaganda passed down. And the right does the same thing. It's equal, right? We have news agencies focused on the right and on the left. I will do a video on propaganda. It will be with regards to saving the world, but it will be called propaganda first. And so that should be a really, really insightful video for everyone to understand how we're influenced. How our belief systems are actually constructs, right? They're not our own thoughts. They're put there, right? They're designed. And we know that there was a program in the 1950s called Operation Mockingbird that was a CIA program that was designed to utilize the media to control our minds, to control our thought process, our belief system, all right? So, all right, that being said, I have a couple more people to mention, and then we'll get on with the history. All right, first of all, I think it's really important that I mention William Casey. William Casey, a friend of mine just had a Zoom call with some very important people. William Binney, ex-encryptions and NSA, and then we had, Ray McGovern from the CIA. So NSA and CIA, these are whistleblowers. Barbara Honegger, and Barbara Honegger was one of the whistleblowers that actually leaked the quote by William Casey, who was director of the CIA in 1981. Sarah McClendon was another. And that quote was, "We'll know when our disinformation program is complete, when everything the American public believes is false." All right? So this should tell you a little bit about what you believe and where it's designed. All right? So Mike Pompeo came out recently and told us that the CIA lies, cheats, and steals. Now, not only have all these intelligence directors alluded to this at one time or another, but we also have the proof. They've been caught doing this over and over again. Yet we believe what we hear on the news. That's where the information comes from, right? So it's actually dropped into the box of the media outlets and disseminated onto the public, right? And then we get emotional about it. It's designed to make us angry at other countries and their leaders, and they're killing their people. They're doing this. Again, you can say whatever you like, even when things really transpire. Don't forget that their hands, are being forced. The context that you perceive is one that's been drawn up for you. Okay, so let's get on with this. I'm going to start with the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was signed between France and Great Britain on May 16th of 1916. This was in anticipation of the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. Now, obviously, the Ottoman Empire didn't dissolve till the early 1920s. It dissolved perniciously. But there was a big plan here. This land was surveyed. They knew that it was very high in resources. And I'm talking about France and Great Britain, these colonial powers, right? Italy was a signatory as well. So Russia wasn't going along with this. And Russia did have enough influence to cause a little bit of trouble there. And so they negotiated. And, France and Great Britain offered Russia the Turkish Straits, Istanbul, and Armenia. Russia accepted, okay? And then suddenly in 1917, we had this revolution in Russia. Very opportunistic for France and Great Britain, I might say. Think whatever you may. Hopefully it stimulates your thought process, because many of these revolutions are stimulated. They are, we have operatives all over the world to create movements when we need to, right? But the idea is that France and Great Britain renegotiated this contract while Russia was in their revolution, right? And they excluded Russia. That's very important. The first of the great offenses against Russia by the West. Now, here's another thing we should really understand. What was the Ottoman Empire, okay? So, Byzantium was an ancient city. Today it's Istanbul. The Greeks settled it in 657 BC. And then we know that in 330 AD, Constantine, the emperor, made it actually Constantinople. It became the Byzantine Empire. In 1299, Islam took hold, right? They took over. The Muslims took over. But the city remained, it really remained Constantinople until 1453. But this was kind of the heart of the Ottoman Empire. But the Ottoman Empire was huge. It was a thin strip of land that crossed the northern borders of Africa. And then it was also most of Armenia and Turkey, and most of what we know today as the Middle East, excluding, of course, Iran, which was Persia, right? The oldest civilization on Earth that we know of in documented history, 7,000 years old. And so, it's a shame the way we treat these countries. We have sanctions on all these countries. Whatever you think about these countries, hopefully I will change your mind a little bit, because I'm going to give you a lot of information in the videos to come. But this one will have a good deal of information, okay? So this is the Sykes-Picot Agreement, right? Halfway between 1914 and 1918, which was World War I, this took place. And again, first offense by the West against Russia that I'm mentioning here. Cohen likes to start with when the wall came down in Berlin, and Cohen is aware of all of history, but he wants to make things very clear. I'm trying to give you a kind of a long range view of what happened with Russia. So let's look at World War II. This is really important. Once again, I want to make it very clear. The people that control the money supply control the world. They've been doing this, and people might say, well, they haven't controlled the world, but they did it regionally throughout history. In Babylonia, we had a king from 1792 to 1750, Hammurabi, and his mathematicians were calculating interest rates and compound interest rates, devising and designing new and sophisticated forms of economic systems. And so they always knew this. These same people, they're just the descendants of the same people, right? As Kissinger said, you control the money supply is very important. But he said if you control oil, you'll control nations, you control the food supply, you'll control the people. So we are totally under control. All right, so let's talk about, and this is still, we're talking about Cohen, and this guy influenced me to such a huge degree here. But I want to talk about World War II and how this control actually was perpetrated on us. So Smedley Butler was the most decorated general in U.S. history. He was a Marine general in World War I. He understood that the war was a racket. It was a scam. And he said we should never leave our shores to go to war. And he also said there are only two things worth fighting for: our homes and the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, right? All right, so let's talk about how these people who control the money supply control the wars. They instigate the wars, then they fund both sides, and then they supply both sides, which generates huge income for them, right? You have to understand that they control all these manufacturers, all these companies, these families that own the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve Act took place on December 23rd of 1913. Paul Warburg was the really the most influential banker in that group. And so I don't want to get too much into that. I do that more in my chronology. But okay, so these people, basically what happened in World War II is Hitler was financed. Yeah, and this is quite easy to actually see once I describe how this transpired. So Hitler was financed by Chase Bank and several other very large banks. And he was also supplied by John D. Rockefeller and his family, who owned Standard Oil. So he supplied the fuel to both sides, to the Nazis, of course. Well, let's go to Henry Ford. Henry Ford was a known anti-Semite, and he supplied engines to the Nazis for their cars and their tanks. Also, we had Volkswagen and Mercedes doing this. But look at these companies that many people think of as American companies. They're multinational. General Electric, IBM, Kodak. Now, Kodak has been manufacturing chemicals for over 100 years, right? So they were all supplying the Nazis. Don't forget about this. And so also DuPont and Dow Chemical. Hugo Boss was making uniforms for the Nazis. So this is generating huge amounts of money. Now there was a problem. Hitler was winning. He was defeating Europe. He had already defeated France. And so these bankers, these people who control the money supply, had to take action very quickly. They came up with a program called Lend-Lease, right? So they disseminated a huge amount of money to the United States, $51.5 billion. Today, that would be the equivalent today of $565 billion. All right, and so most of this would go to England, and keep in mind, because England was really the last front there. If they had breached England, they would have taken over Europe, and so England received $30 billion, and Stalin received, of course, this was the Soviet Union starting with 1922. Stalin received $11.3 billion. That was the equivalent today of $120 billion. Now, it didn't come in the form mostly of cash. It came mostly in the form of supplies and food and arms, all kinds of weapons. The idea here was to create a balance of power, not to win the war. You have to understand, the longer they can perpetuate the war, the more income they generate, right? And this is how they can forgive so much debt. They forgave, the debt for the Ottoman Empire was relatively small. That's going back. That was, I don't know, I think it was maybe $176 million or something like that, but it was in the millions, regardless. And so that debt was able to be forgiven. They forgave much of Germany's debt because of all this capital they're generating by supplying both sides. Okay, so this is the Lend-Lease program. Now, Russia won't forget about this. They lost 27 million people. The United States lost 400,000. All right, so I'm going to mention China here. It's very important. China was not directly involved in World War II, but they were responsible for our victory. And it wasn't our victory, really. It should have been Russia's victory. But let's tell you how this actually transpired in China. So from 1931 to 1937, Japan attacked China. This was the Battle of Manchuria. Okay, in 1937, they pretty much demolished Shanghai. The U.S. and France and Great Britain had a base there. And so, we saw that the people that were left were forced to pick up the industry and the railroads and carry them on foot, most of them, 1,000 miles. Think about that. There are documentaries showing these people carrying these. There's one called the Battle of China, in which it's kind of a propaganda video by the government, in that the government just talks up China over and over again, how they've never attacked anybody. They're the greatest people in the world. And look at that. Look at the antithesis we have today of that with regard to the propaganda on China, right? And so, they traveled, so many of them died along the way. And they built a new city in Chongqing. That was 1,000 miles away. The city was bombed again, but the Chinese were very intelligent and very, very innovative. They buried their industry underground to protect it. And so they lost 20 million. But can you imagine how much they weakened Japan from 1931 to 1945 with their efforts. I mean, Japan was attacking everybody, of course. And so, okay, so that gives you an idea what between Russia and China, 47 million people lost, 400,000 for the United States. And the United States has the nerve to get together with France and Great Britain and celebrate their victory, right? And they leave China and they excluded Putin, which brought Putin and Xi Jinping together. That's why they have to demonize them more with more and more propaganda. And so, look, the United States holds the fate of the world and these bankers that controls the United States and our military, right? If we wanted to get along with everybody, Russia, Putin's made it very clear, and so has Xi Jinping. They want detente. They want to get along with us. But these bankers want a one world government. That's what Paul Warburg told us in his quote when he actually, when he designed the Federal Reserve. So even his son repeated that, James Paul Warburg, in front of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Senate in 1950. So, all right, we should be aware of this. Then we would move on to McCarthyism, total smear of, this Red Scare, trying to smear communism and socialism and Russia being associated with it. But let's move up here now to, well, it's still same time period, 1953. We're going to talk about Iran. This is really important. Iran, of course, now, England doesn't want Russia to get their hands, or the Soviet Union to get their hands on any of Iranian oil, right? So they have a company in Iran called the AIOC. It's called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. And so not many people know about this. But when Mossadegh was taken down by Eisenhower in 1953, it was because he was threatening to audit the AIOC. He wanted to do what Hugo Chavez was doing in Venezuela, what really made the country wealthy. He wanted to nationalize the oil, right, and share it with the public. A lot of countries do that. The United States doesn't do that. I won't get into that because it'll just make you mad if I tell you what's going on here. But the idea is they always want to destroy the working class. They want a 1% in every country. These bankers are very organized, and they use the United States and their military for that. And they put a stop to that. And they rather than have Mossadegh in there, they took him down. They installed the Shah. 25 years of brutal dictatorship in Iran, right? Really, and then we have the nerve to actually, put them down, put these sanctions on them, consider them to be the world's largest sponsor of terrorism. We know who that really is. That's very sad. And so, Iran finally came out of that with their revolution in 1979. It was a big moment for them. Incidentally, what happened in 1979? Well, in 1979, a very important historical event, Russia invaded Afghanistan. Okay. Russia was aware, like the United States, of the huge mineral deposits in Afghanistan. And of course, the United States was interested in their poppy fields as well. That would generate huge income for us. And so, as Hillary Clinton said, and again, you know how I feel about presidents and politicians. When they open up their mouth, they're lying unless they're saying something that's true, which kind of hurts us in a way. So she was actually talking about how we were arming the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. That was very, very important. She said we left weapons scattered all over that area in Pakistan. And so that armed a lot of terrorists. And that's what the bankers do, right? They use our military for this. They use, like they did, they used China, they used Russia to defeat or to hold off rather than use our people because, we had to have a lot of people here to produce these weapons and to produce whatever we needed here in the United States at that time to further everything. Obviously, our tech industry had to be furthered. And so we had a time that was very fruitful in the 1950s and 1960s. After the war, it was good times here after they got things going. But anyway, all right. So the United States was able to force Russia out of Afghanistan. Russia had so much money invested in this. It destroyed their economy. All right. So this was a terrible event for them. So they were forced out by 1989. In 1989, another important event happened. That was the wall came down in Berlin. And we know this is what Cohen really likes to focus on. James Baker, who was Secretary of State under H.W. Bush, made a verbal agreement with Gorbachev that now that the wall was down, well, NATO would never step an inch closer to the Russian borders. Well, we know we have them surrounded now. Missile launchers in Romania and Poland, and allergies are getting a little bit bad here. And so the promise was not kept. It was actually, I mean, this is a documented promise. The verbal agreement was actually documented. But look, we never keep our promises. We didn't keep our promise with Iran in the JCPOA. That's the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. That's causing so much trouble here. I mean, this is just really sad what we've done with sanctions around the country. It's very powerful to have the petrodollar, right? Okay, so let's move on. 1991. Now we know Russia's economy is devastated. Of course, Germany now is unified, and in 1991, Boris Yeltsin becomes president. He's an alcoholic. He's really a puppet for the United States. United States is able to exploit Yeltsin, and as well as do the oligarchs in Russia. So they're cashing in on all these huge mineral deposits and energy deposits, and so the United States is benefiting from this. The oligarchs are benefiting, but who's not? The Russian people. So their economy is just getting worse, right? This is really bad news. So what does the United States do? As I said, Michael Hayden said we're the best in the world at manipulating elections. So in 1996, before the election, Yeltsin had less than a 3% approval rating in Russia. Think about that. That's awful, right? He was an alcoholic. The economy was destroyed. Yet Clinton was able to spend between $1 billion and $1.5 billion to install, once again, Yeltsin, right? The puppet for the United States. By 1999, Putin takes over. The oligarchs in the United States thought, oh, they got another patsy here. Putin was not that patsy. I'm sure he's subservient to the oligarchs to a degree. He has to be beholden to them. They are the money, right? But he's really put his foot down in a lot of ways. So this video is getting, it's getting pretty long. I'd like to give you more details, but this is the most important event. I think it's really important for people to understand this event, to really grasp how propaganda works, right? How our propaganda works. Keep in mind, it's designed by think tanks like Brookings Institute and German Marshall Fund and Atlantic Council and Hudson Institute. That's their job, to architect wars. Heritage Foundation. All right, and so this in 2014. This is in January now. On January 28th, a phone call took place between Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt. Okay. Victoria Nuland was Secretary of European and Eurasian Affairs under Obama, and she was incidentally also the wife, or she is the wife, of Robert Kagan. Robert Kagan is a historian and a big-time neocon, warmongering neocon in Washington. He was a founding member of the Project for the New American Century, founded in 1997. They later became the Foreign Policy Initiative. These are people like Dick Cheney, and you're talking about Paul Wolfowitz, former head of the World Bank, right? Richard Pearl, William Crystal, who shows up on the Bill Maher show. All these shows are propaganda outlets. You have to understand that. I will get into that in my next video. So here's what happened. Okay, so the phone call is discussing and architecting the coup of Ukraine. All right, and so Jeffrey Pyatt was ambassador for the United States to Ukraine, and he's now the ambassador to Greece. That shows you there's no accountability here, right? These ambassadors are not diplomats. They are not diplomats. They're architects of war. That is their job. All right. So you can listen to the phone call on the internet. It's all over the internet, right? It's proof. Yet you still have these television shows talking about Putin invading Russia. You look it up, or invading Ukraine. I'm sorry, my mistake. And so let's talk about the phone call a little bit. So the phone call actually was leaked on February 4th. Okay, so it transpired on January 28th. It was leaked on February 4th. 2 weeks later, on February 18th, we had the coup. But in the interim, let me tell you what transpired here. So the United States now has pushed Europe to try and create this trade deal, an exclusive trade deal between Europe and Ukraine. So Yanukovych was president. And Europe approaches Yanukovych and says, look, we want an exclusive trade deal with you. And he said, well, I have this trade deal with Putin. No. We want an exclusive trade deal with you. So he goes to Putin. He says, look, Europe wants this trade deal, and what should I do? They're being pressured by the United States, and Putin's like, well, I mean, what about a three-way deal? What's wrong with that? Why can't we have a three-way trade deal, right? And so, they didn't go for that. And here's the thing, Russia and Ukraine already have a trade deal. Many of the people who work many of the labor force, much of the labor force in Ukraine actually works in Russia, right? They're actually they're feeding their families, they're supporting their families on Russian money. This is part of the trade agreement, right, between Russia and Ukraine. And so, all right, so Yanukovych goes back to Europe and says, no, I've got this trade deal with Russia. So what happens now? The United States is controlling. I talked about operatives. We control a huge group of neo-fascists and neo-Nazis in Ukraine. So they came down, and basically all this violence erupted on the Maidan Square. Yanukovych had to flee. That was the idea. And when he fled to Russia, sanctuary with Putin, the United States, I should say Obama, installed Poroshenko. He admits to that. You can find that on YouTube as well. It's a little bit harder to find. It's on there. But it doesn't matter. We already know what happened, right? We have Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt's phone call where she says F Europe, right? I mean, that's pretty blatant and pretty disturbing for Europe. And this is why. This is what's going on. I'll tell you what she means. This is all about the Nordstrom Pipeline, right? Most of you have probably heard about it. Russia's been building this pipeline to funnel natural gas into Eastern Europe. The United States has been fighting it. They want to sell Eastern Europe, predominantly now Germany and Austria. They want to sell them liquid natural gas, which is much more expensive. It's causing all kinds of havoc. Germany is our ally, but there's all this kind of conflict going on, this unrest between Angela Merkel and Trump. And so, all right, so it's important to know that this is what it's about, right? F the EU, says Victoria Nuland. Who cares how much they have to pay for natural gas? And so this kind of explains what's been going on, all right? I think, you get a general idea. I hope I gave you a comprehensive understanding of what transpired here, what detente with Russia means. They're the greatest nuclear power in the world next to the United States. Do we want to have conflict with Russia? Are we worried about Trump that much? I mean, I don't like Trump at all. I despise Trump. I don't really. I mean, he does create hate and conflict all over the world, but he's not any worse than Obama was. When you look at the quality of the person and how they're selling out their country for money, I could go down the policies of Obama. It would be very disturbing for people. People aren't aware. I mean, well, I don't want to get into that now. I'm at the end of this video. I'll do another video talking about the presidents. But, the point is, each successive president is the worst president in U.S. history, and each predecessor lays the groundwork for a successor, right? We saw that with George Bush's Patriot Act. That's why we only have one party. Nancy Pelosi recently incorporated an extension for the Patriot Act in a funding bill. Why? Right? It destroyed our Constitution. It destroyed our right to habeas corpus, and our right to a trial. And so it really is, it's very sad what's going on here. And and Obama's National Defense Authorization Act in 2012 was much more egregious than Bush's initial implementation after 9/11. You had Chris Hedges, who sued Obama. He was the plaintiff. You had Noam Chomsky and Daniel Ellsberg as co-plaintiffs, along with others. They won the case. It was later overturned, of course, executive power. This isn't what the bankers want. And so, all right, so my name is Eric. I'm going to cut this short. It's almost 35 minutes. And so, again, my YouTube channel is Eric's Eye Opener. Thanks to you, Stephen F. Cohen. In your legacy, we'll make change. And until every person in this country that is either Democrat or Republican can admit that their president is just as bad as the president they don't like, we'll never have change and we'll be doomed. And I'm going to bring this up and I'm going to make a case for it in my next video that will be undeniable for everybody. That's the video on propaganda, okay? So thanks again, Stephen F. Cohen. And once again, the date today is the 27th. I hope I didn't say the 26th. I may have said that. But all right, well, we'll talk soon. Thanks, everybody.